The first time Richard Whitmore heard the word shelter connected to his granddaughter, it came from a stranger's mouth in a public hallway, spoken casually, almost carelessly, as if it were weather. "She's been sleeping there 3 nights now," the woman said. "Cots, fluorescent lights, intake line starts before sunrise." Richard stopped walking. The marble floor of the Boston probate court echoed with other footsteps, but his own seemed to vanish beneath him. He turned slowly, the way men do when they're bracing for impact, as if speed might make it worse. "Say that again," he said. The woman hesitated. She was in her early 40s, county badge clipped to a wrinkled blazer, a clipboard hugged tight against her chest like armor. She had not expected him to look like this. Not like a man who could afford the skyline behind him. Not like someone whose name was etched on buildings and endowments. "I'm talking about Emily Whitmore," she said carefully. "Age 18. Recently discharged from a private residence. No documentation on file, no access to funds. She presented herself at a women's shelter in Greater Boston." Richard felt the words land one by one like blunt instruments. Discharged. No documentation. No access to funds. That last part echoed. "No access to funds," he repeated softer now. The woman nodded. "She says her guardian told her everything was handled, that she'd be fine, that help would come." Richard stared at her. His mouth opened, then closed again. Somewhere behind his eyes, a pressure began to build. Not panic. Something colder, more dangerous. "Excuse me," he said and stepped past her. The hallway narrowed, ahead the sound of voices rising, phones, ringing, doors opening and shutting. Richard walked through it as if underwater. He reached the exit, pushed through the glass doors, and stepped into late afternoon light that felt too bright, too indifferent. His driver straightened when he saw him. "Sir!" "Cancel the rest of the day," Richard said. His voice was steady. It always was. "I need the car." The driver didn't ask where. As the door closed behind him, Richard leaned back against the leather seat and exhaled through his nose. He had built his life on leverage, on foresight, on knowing where every dollar went and why. For decades, people had underestimated him because he spoke quietly, because he let them talk first, because he never raised his voice. But this was different. This was blood. He closed his eyes, and the past moved in, whether he invited it or not. Laura's laugh. Bright, sudden, the way it filled a room without asking permission. The hospital corridor, years later, smelling of antiseptic and fear. The doctor's hands folded. The pause that said everything before words ever arrived. Richard had not cried then. He had signed papers, made calls, arranged things. That was how he survived. Action over emotion, control over collapse. Emily had been a name on documents, a photograph mailed once a year, a birthday noted on a calendar he never opened on that day. He had told himself this was mercy. The car slowed as they crossed into a neighborhood where the buildings changed. Brick grew tired. Windows shrank. Billboards promised help with problems no one talked about at dinner parties. Richard watched it all with a narrowing gaze. "Stop here," he said suddenly. The driver pulled over in front of a low building with a faded sign and a line already forming outside despite the hour. Women stood with backpacks, plastic bags, shoulders hunched against more than cold. A security guard leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes scanning without warmth or cruelty. Just routine. Richard stepped out of the car. The sound hit him first. Coughs, shoes scuffing concrete. A baby crying somewhere inside, thin and exhausted. He adjusted his coat, an unconscious gesture, then stopped himself. He let his hands fall to his sides. Inside, the air was stale and overheated. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly, a constant hum that never quite faded into the background. A volunteer at a folding table looked up, surprise flickering across her face. "Can I help you?" "I'm here about Emily Whitmore," Richard said. The volunteer's eyes shifted. She glanced toward a hallway, then back at him. "Who are you?" "I'm family." That earned him a longer look. Appraisal. Doubt. Experience had taught this woman to trust no one quickly. "She's in intake," the volunteer said finally. "You can wait." "I'll stand," Richard replied. Minutes passed, maybe more. Time behaved strangely in places like this, stretching and compressing without warning. Richard noticed details he would never have seen before. A crack in the linoleum, taped over instead of fixed. A woman rocking back and forth, counting under her breath. A girl no older than 20 staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else. Then the door at the end of the hall opened. Emily stepped out. She was thinner than the photographs, taller than he expected. Her hair was pulled back with a cheap elastic, a few strands escaping to frame a face that carried both youth and something prematurely older. Her sweatshirt hung loose sleeves pushed up as if she were always ready to work. She stopped when she saw him. Not because she recognized him. She didn't. But because his eyes were on her with an intensity that made people pause, made them wonder if they were in danger or about to be changed forever. "Can I help you?" Emily asked. Her voice was calm, careful, the voice of someone who had learned to keep their tone neutral. Richard took a step forward, then stopped himself. He had not earned that. "My name is Richard Whitmore," he said. "I'm looking for Emily." "That's me," she said. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "If this is about paperwork, I already told intake I don't have." "I know," Richard said. "I know you don't." Silence stretched between them. The volunteer watched closely now. So did the security guard. Emily studied his face. The coat, the shoes, the posture that spoke of boardrooms and closed doors. "I don't know you," she said. "I know," Richard replied. Something in his voice shifted then. Not weakness, not pleading. Responsibility. "I should have come sooner," he said. Emily's eyes flickered. Just for a moment. Curiosity fought with instinct. "This isn't a good place to talk," she said. "If you're here to offer help, you should speak to the caseworker." "I will," Richard said. "But first I need to ask you something." He took a breath. The kind men take before crossing a line they can never uncross. When you were told everything was handled, he said, "Who told you that?" Emily's mouth tightened. Her shoulders squared. "My aunt," she said. "She said the money was protected, that it wasn't something I needed to worry about." Richard nodded slowly. "And when you left her house?" he asked. "What did she give you?" Emily hesitated, then reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded envelope worn soft at the edges. She didn't open it. She didn't have to. This she said. "And a bus pass." Richard felt something harden in his chest. He did not touch the envelope. Not yet. "Thank you," he said. Emily looked at him, searching now. Really searching. "You still haven't told me why you're here," she said. Richard met her gaze. Held it. "I'm here," he said, "because someone has been spending money in your name for 18 years. The room seemed to tilt. Emily's breath caught. What money? Richard did not answer immediately. Outside, the city kept moving. Cars passed. People hurried home. Somewhere a clock ticked toward evening. Inside that shelter, in the space between a young woman who had been told to expect nothing and an old man who had assumed distance, was protection. A question hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. "Where was your $2 million trust fund?" Emily didn't answer him right away. She stood there with the envelope still in her hand, fingers curled so tightly the paper bent inward, as if it might disappear if she loosened her grip. Around them, the shelter continued breathing. Someone laughed too loudly in the hallway. A metal chair scraped against the floor. Life indifferent and relentless. $2 million, she said finally. You're saying that like it's a real thing. It is, Richard replied. Or it was. That did it. A sound escaped her, sharp and involuntary. Not quite a laugh, not quite disbelief. Something closer to anger finding air. You should talk to intake, she said, her voice suddenly clipped. They handle donors and lawyers and people who think they can fix things with words. I didn't come here with words, Richard said. I came here because someone emptied an account that was never meant to be touched. Emily shook her head. You don't know anything about me. That's true, Richard said. But I know a lot about money. She studied him again, slower this time. Not just the coat or the posture now, but the way he stood still when she pushed back. The way he didn't flinch. People who lied usually rushed. They filled silence with noise. This man didn't. Come with me, she said abruptly. She turned before he could respond, already walking toward the hallway. The volunteer opened her mouth to protest, then stopped when Emily glanced back with a look that said she was done asking permission. The intake office was barely an office. 2 mismatched desks, a coffee mug with a crack down the side, a small window frosted over so no one could see and only shadows moving past. Emily closed the door behind them and leaned against it, arms crossed. Say it again, she said, slow. Richard did. He told her about the custodial account, about the monthly transfers, about the paperwork he had signed when she was a baby because he couldn't stand to hear her cry without hearing Laura's voice echo underneath it. He told her how the account was structured, how it was supposed to work, how it could be abused if someone knew exactly where the blind spots were. Emily listened without interrupting. Her face didn't soften. It didn't harden either. It went still like a lake before a storm. You're saying my aunt stole from me, she said. Yes, Richard answered. For 18 years. Yes. And you're just figuring this out now. Richard didn't look away. Yes. She laughed then. This time it was unmistakable. Short. Bitter. Do you know what she used to tell me? Emily said. When I asked why we never had money for field trips or new shoes, she said sacrifices build character, that people like me should be grateful for structure. Richard closed his eyes for half a second. When he opened them, the room felt smaller. She told me my grandfather didn't want me, Emily went on, that he sent money because he felt guilty, not because he cared, that he didn't want to see me because I reminded him of my mother dying. The words hit him harder than any accusation could have, not because they surprised him, but because they fit too neatly around the truth he had never said out loud. I never said that, Richard said quietly. But you never showed up either? Emily replied. Silence pressed in, this one heavier than the last. A knock came at the door. Emily, a woman's voice called. You okay in there? Emily exhaled through her nose. I'm fine, Claire. Just paperwork. The footsteps retreated. Emily turned back to Richard. If what you're saying is true, then where is it? The money. Richard reached into his coat and pulled out a thin folder. He placed it on the desk, but didn't open it. Some of it is real estate now, he said. Some of it is sitting in accounts that don't have your name on them. Some of it paid for private schools and cars and things you never touched. Emily stared at the folder like it might bite. And you just walked in here, she said, and expected me to believe that. No, Richard said. I expected you not to. That surprised her. He saw it in the way her eyes shifted. I expect you to be careful, he continued. I expect you to doubt me. I would. Emily considered that. Then she asked, why now? Richard's jaw tightened. Because she made a mistake, he said. Not with the money. With timing. Emily raised an eyebrow. Explain. She pushed you out the moment you turned 18, Richard said. Which means she assumed you had no leverage, no way to ask questions, no one who would look twice. Emily's fingers flexed at her sides, but she also assumed I wouldn't. Richard went on. She underestimated how quickly patterns show up when you stop ignoring them. Emily walked to the desk and picked up the folder. She didn't open it. She just held it. I want proof, she said. Not your word, not your guilt. Proof. You'll have it, Richard said. But not tonight. Her head snapped up. Why not? Because once you see it, he said nothing. Goes back to the way it was. And you're not sleeping in this building again. Emily stiffened. You don't get to decide that. No, Richard agreed. You do. She studied him, really studied him now, the lines in his face that weren't just age but consequence, the steadiness that didn't ask for forgiveness, the weight of someone who had spent a lifetime being listened to and was now forcing himself to listen instead. You think I'm just going to walk out of here with you? She said. I think you're going to talk to Claire, Richard said. And the caseworker. And anyone else you need. And I think you're going to choose a place where you can lock a door tonight. Emily hesitated. Then she opened the door. Claire looked up from her desk. Everything okay? Emily nodded slowly. I need you to call my caseworker. And legal aid, Claire glanced at Richard. Is this man... He's part of the problem, Emily said. Then after a beat, and possibly the solution. Claire didn't smile. She nodded once and reached for the phone. Hours later, the shelter lights dimmed. Intake wrapped up. Paperwork was signed. Emily sat on the edge of a chair in Claire's office, arms wrapped around herself as a social worker explained options in a calm, practiced voice. Richard waited outside. He didn't pace. He didn't check his phone. He stood by the window and watched the city shift into night, the way buildings lit up one by one like someone deciding finally to be seen. When Emily stepped out, she looked exhausted. But she also looked different. Straighter. I'm not coming with you, she said. Richard nodded. I know. I'm staying somewhere else, she said. A transitional apartment. Short term. That's good, he said. She hesitated. You can drive me. I'd be honored, Richard replied. As they walked out together, the security guard opened the door without comment. Outside, the air was colder now. Emily paused by the curb. You don't get absolution, she said. Not yet. I'm not asking for it, Richard said. She watched him for a long moment. Then she handed him the envelope. You should see this, she said. Richard opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Handwritten. A list of rules. What she owed. What she was allowed to eat. Who she could talk to. At the bottom, in tighter script, one final line. Gratitude is not optional. Richard folded the paper and slipped it back into the envelope. No, he said quietly. It isn't. The car door closed behind them. The engine started. And as they pulled away from the shelter, neither of them spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, but because both understood that the real confrontation was still ahead, and silence for once was not avoidance. It was preparation. The bank conference room smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and old paper, the kind of neutral scent meant to reassure people that nothing dangerous happened here. Emily sat at the far end of the table with her hands folded in her lap, watching three strangers study documents that had shaped her entire life without her knowing it. Richard stood near the window. He preferred to listen from there. It gave him distance. Control. This is not a trust, the woman from compliance said, adjusting her glasses. Her voice was professional clipped. It's a custodial account governed under state guardianship statutes, which means the guardian had broad discretion provided expenses could be framed as benefiting the minor. Emily's jaw tightened. So she could take whatever she wanted. The woman didn't flinch. She could take whatever she could justify. Richard turned slowly. "And these transfers?" he asked. A younger man slid a chart across the table. Lines moved from one column to another, neat and devastating. "They're clean," he said. "Clean in the way theft hides best. Small amounts at first, then larger. Always timed after your deposits. Always labeled with acceptable descriptions." Emily leaned forward. "Like what?" The man glanced at his notes. Educational support, housing stability, transportation for dependents. Emily let out a sharp breath. "I took the bus." Richard closed his eyes. Another woman spoke older, quieter. "The pattern changes 3 years ago." Richard's eyes opened. "How?" "The transfers accelerate," she said. "Larger sums, faster movement." And then something else. She turned the monitor toward them. A property deed filled the screen. "That house," Emily said softly. "The one with the white columns." "Yes," the woman said. "Purchased outright. No mortgage. Funds originated from the custodial account." Emily stared at the image until the edges blurred. "She told me the house belonged to a church friend." Richard's voice cut in low and precise. "What about recent activity?" The man hesitated. "There was an attempt." "Attempt," Richard repeated. "To liquidate what remained," the man said. "Last month. It failed because the account flagged on age transition. The beneficiary aged out. Control should have transferred." Emily's head snapped up. "Should have?" "Yes," the woman said. But the guardian filed an emergency petition claiming the beneficiary was unstable and required continued oversight. The room went still. "Unstable," Emily said. "Based on what?" The woman didn't answer immediately. She reached into a folder and pulled out a single page. "This." Emily took it with trembling hands. It was a typed statement. Dates, observations, allegations of erratic behavior, emotional volatility, inability to manage finances. None of it was true. All of it sounded official. "She built a case," Richard said. "Yes," the woman replied, and she submitted it before anyone could contradict her. Emily felt heat crawl up her neck. She was going to keep it. Richard nodded once. She wasn't done. The meeting ended not with resolution, but with momentum. Lawyers were called. A forensic accountant joined by video. The word litigation floated through the room, heavy and unavoidable. When they stepped back outside, the city felt louder than before. Emily stopped on the sidewalk, the folder clutched to her chest. "She planned this," Emily said. "Every part." "Yes," Richard said. "And you still trusted her." The accusation wasn't sharp. It was tired. Richard didn't defend himself. "I trusted the version of her that made my life easier." Emily looked at him then. Really looked. "That's not nothing." "No," he said. "It's worse." They drove in silence until the city thinned and the road curved toward water. Richard pulled over near a small park overlooking the harbor. Boats rocked gently, indifferent to everything. "I need to show you something," he said. He opened the trunk and retrieved a small box. Not expensive. Wood worn smooth by time. He placed it on the bench between them. Emily hesitated before opening it. Inside were photographs. Not staged, not smiling for holidays. Candid moments. A young woman in scrubs laughing. A graduation cap tossed midair. A hospital bracelet still on her wrist. "My daughter," Richard said. "Your mother." Emily touched the edge of one photo with a fingertip. "She looks happy." "She was," Richard said. "And she was stubborn. And she would have fought this." Emily swallowed. Why didn't you? The question landed softly. That was worse. Because I thought writing checks was the same as showing up, Richard said. And because no one challenged me when I chose distance. Emily closed the box. They were quiet again when Richard's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen and frowned. That's odd. What? My attorney, he said. He doesn't call twice. He answered, listened. His posture shifted subtle, but unmistakable. What do you mean she's there? He said. Emily watched his face change. Tighten. Yes, Richard said. I understand. Don't let her leave. He ended the call. She went to court, Emily said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Richard replied. She filed a motion this morning, emergency custody continuation. She claims you're being manipulated. Emily's breath hitched. By you. Yes. Emily stood abruptly. She's flipping the story. She's racing it, Richard said. She knows time is not on her side. Emily's hands shook. She's done this my whole life. Stayed one step ahead, made sure no one ever asked me directly. Richard rose as well. She didn't expect you to walk into a bank. Emily laughed, sharp and humorless. She never expected me to walk anywhere. They drove straight to the courthouse. Inside, the air was colder, the lighting harsher. Patricia Coleman sat on a bench outside the courtroom, legs crossed, coat, pristine hair perfect. She looked up when she saw them, surprise flashing across her face before smoothing into something practiced. Emily, she said. There you are. Emily stopped. Patricia stood, concern etched carefully into her features. I've been so worried. You disappeared. You scared me. Emily didn't respond. Patricia turned to Richard. I don't know what you think you're doing, she said, voice trembling just enough. But this isn't helping her. Richard stepped forward. Sit down. The words were quiet, absolute. Patricia blinked. Excuse me. I said, Richard repeated, sit down. Something in his tone cut through the performance. Patricia hesitated, then lowered herself back onto the bench. You don't get to rewrite this anymore, Richard said. Not today. Patricia's eyes flicked to Emily. Honey, he's confused. He's always had trouble letting go. Emily felt the old pull, the instinct to shrink, to doubt her own footing. Then she remembered the list, the envelope, the line at the bottom. Gratitude is not optional. No, Emily said. Her voice surprised her with its steadiness. It isn't. Patricia's smile faltered. You filed paperwork saying I'm unstable, Emily continued. But you forgot something. Patricia stiffened. What? I'm not alone anymore. The courtroom doors opened. A clerk called names. Patricia stood adjusting her coat. This isn't over. Richard met her gaze. It is, he said. You just don't know it yet. As they walked inside, Emily felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not relief, not victory, traction. For the first time, the ground beneath her didn't feel like it was about to give way. The judge did not look at Emily when the hearing began. She looked at Patricia Coleman, then at the paperwork stacked neatly in front of her, then finally at Richard Whitmore standing without a lawyer beside him, hands folded, posture calm. Emergency continuation of guardianship, the judge said, reading aloud. Filed this morning. Alleging financial incompetence and undue influence. Patricia nodded quickly. Yes, Your Honor. My niece has been taken advantage of during a vulnerable transition. She has no experience managing assets. She's being pressured by a wealthy relative with a history of emotional distance. The words were chosen carefully, soft, protective, the kind that sounded like love when spoken slowly. Emily felt her stomach tighten. This was the room where truth usually lost to tone. The judge turned slightly. Ms. Whitmore, do you understand what this hearing is about? Emily nodded. Yes. And do you contest your aunt's claims? Yes. The judge raised an eyebrow. On what grounds? Emily opened her mouth, then stopped. She felt the familiar urge to rush to over-explain to justify existing. It had been trained into her. Patricia knew that. Richard shifted beside her. Not forward, not backward, just enough to be seen. Your Honor, he said, voice. Even. May I speak? Patricia's head snapped toward him. You are not counsel. I'm aware, Richard replied. I'm the petitioner's father. The judge looked up fully now. Father. My daughter is deceased, Richard said. I'm the beneficiary's grandfather. That landed. The room recalibrated. The judge leaned back slightly. Go on. Richard did not thank her. He did not soften his tone. This filing is not about guardianship. It's about timing. Ms. Coleman submitted this motion less than 48 hours after control of a custodial account was legally set to transfer. Patricia shook her head. That's not. The judge lifted a hand. Let him finish. Richard continued. She did so after repeated attempts to access funds failed. Funds that originated from me. Funds I transferred monthly for 18 years. Patricia laughed lightly. Your Honor, he's confused. Those funds were used for Emily's care. Richard turned his head slightly. Were they? The judge's gaze sharpened. Ms. Coleman, you'll have time to respond. Richard reached into his coat and removed a thin packet. This is a preliminary forensic summary from an independent accounting firm, he said. It shows property purchases, vehicle acquisitions, and tuition payments made from the custodial account for beneficiaries other than Emily Whitmore. Patricia stood abruptly. Objection! The judge's voice cut through the room. Sit down. Patricia froze, then slowly lowered herself back into the chair. Ms. Coleman, the judge said, did you file this motion knowing that the account in question was under review? Patricia's lips parted. Closed again. I filed it to protect my niece. Answer the question. Yes, Patricia said. The judge nodded once, noted. Emily's heart pounded. She stared at the seal on the wall behind the bench, grounding herself in something solid. Ms. Whitmore, the judge said, turning to her. Now why did you leave your aunt's residence? Emily swallowed. Because I was told to. By whom? My aunt. Patricia interjected. I asked her to find independence. Emily turned to her. You told me I was done being your responsibility. Those were your words. The judge looked back to Patricia. Did you provide funds, documents, or transitional support? Patricia hesitated. She declined help. Emily's voice cut in quiet but firm. That's not true. The judge held Emily's gaze. What did she give you? Emily reached into her bag and placed the folded envelope on the table. This. And a bus pass. The judge opened the envelope. Read. Her expression changed. Gratitude is not optional, the judge read aloud. Silence filled the room. Patricia's voice rose. Your Honor, this is being taken out of context. The judge closed the envelope. Ms. Coleman, context does not excuse coercion. She turned back to Richard. Mr. Whitmore, why did you not intervene sooner? The question landed where it hurt most. Richard did not dodge it. Because I chose distance over accountability. The judge studied him. That's an unusual answer. It's the accurate one, Richard said. The judge nodded slowly. It will be considered. She looked at the clerk. I'm denying the emergency continuation. Patricia shot to her feet. You can't! The judge's voice sharpened. I am ordering a full investigation into the management of the custodial account. Effective immediately, Ms. Coleman is prohibited from accessing or representing control over any assets in Emily Whitmore's name. Emily exhaled, shaky and relieved. And the judge continued, I am referring this matter to the district attorney for review of potential financial misconduct. Patricia's face drained of color. This hearing is adjourned, the judge said. The gavel struck. Outside the courtroom, the hallway buzzed with low conversation. Patricia emerged, stiffly, phone already in her hand. This isn't over, she hissed as she passed them. You think you've won because you embarrassed me? Richard didn't respond. Emily watched Patricia disappear down the hall, heels clicking fast, unsteady. I thought she'd cry, Emily said softly. Or scream. Richard shook his head. She'll do neither. They walked in silence until they reached the steps outside. The afternoon sun felt harsh after the courtroom's pale light. Emily sat down heavily. What happens now? Now Richard said she tries to save herself. Emily laughed, weakly. And what do we do? Richard sat beside her. Not too close. Close enough? We prepare, he said, because the next move won't be polite. Emily looked at him. You sound like you've done this before. Richard's eyes darkened. I have. She studied him, seeing something new beneath the calm. Not just regret. Resolve. You're not just a man who sends checks, she said. No, Richard replied. I'm a man who should have asked harder questions. Emily nodded slowly. A man in a dark coat approached, a badge visible. Mr. Whitmore. Yes. I'm with the district attorney's office, the man said. We'd like to speak with you, both of you. Emily stiffened. Richard stood. Of course. As they followed the man back inside, Emily felt the familiar fear rise. But this time, it didn't paralyze her. This time, it sharpened her. Behind them, the courthouse doors closed with a heavy finality. And somewhere between the echo of the gavel and the first step back into those halls, the story shifted from survival to something else entirely. Accountability had entered the room. The district attorney's office occupied a floor that felt intentionally bland, as if neutrality itself were a form of authority. Emily sat at the narrow table with her hands wrapped around a paper cup of water, watching condensation gather and slide down the side. Across from her, the assistant district attorney listened without interrupting, pen moving steadily, eyes sharp but not unkind. Start from the beginning, the woman said. Not the money. The living. Emily took a breath. She spoke slowly at first, then faster, as if once the door opened, the words rushed to escape. She described the rules posted on the refrigerator, the locked cabinet, the way silence became punishment, how asking questions led to longer chores, colder meals, fewer privileges that had never been privileges at all. Richard listened from the chair beside her, hands clasped, jaw set. He did not correct. He did not add. This was not his testimony. When I turned 18, Emily said her obligation was done. She told me I had everything I needed to survive. The assistant district attorney looked up. Did she give you access to your identification? No. Any financial information? No. Did she explain the account? Emily shook her head. She told me money made people weak. The pen paused. And when you left, the woman asked, Where did you go? Emily hesitated. The answer still felt too raw. A library, then a bus station, then the shelter. The assistant district attorney nodded once. Thank you. She turned to Richard. Mr. Whitmore. Richard straightened. Yes. You've reviewed the preliminary accounting? Yes. And you confirm the funds originated with you? Yes. For how long? Richard answered without hesitation. 18 years, monthly, without interruption. The woman held his gaze. Why no independent oversight? Richard didn't look away. Because I trusted the wrong structure and the wrong person. The assistant district attorney leaned back slightly. Trust is not a defense. but clarity helps. She closed her notebook. We will proceed. Outside, the sky had dimmed. Evening settled in the way it always did, gradual and unavoidable. Emily stepped into the street and felt the city press in again, loud and alive and indifferent. "Are you okay?" Richard asked. "I don't know," Emily said, "but I don't feel invisible." They walked to the car. Halfway there, Richard's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "Answer it," Emily said. He did. "Yes," Richard said. He listened, his expression tightening. "When?" A pause. "Understood." He ended the call. "She's liquidating," he said. Emily stopped. "What?" "She's moving assets," Richard continued. "Selling what she can. Quietly. Before warrants freeze everything." Emily felt heat rush to her face. "Can she do that?" "Not legally," Richard said. "But she can try." They drove straight to the house. The white columns glowed under the porch lights, immaculate and unreal. 2 cars sat in the driveway, engines still warm. Richard pulled up behind them and cut the engine. Inside, voices echoed, laughter, glass clinking. Emily froze. "She's hosting," Emily whispered. "She's performing," Richard corrected. They stepped inside without knocking. The living room was full. Well-dressed people, wine glasses, polite smiles that faltered when they saw who had entered. Patricia stood near the fireplace, a glass in her hand, eyes widening for half a second before settling into something smooth. "Richard," she said brightly, "what a surprise." Her gaze slid to Emily. "And you brought her." Emily didn't move. She let Patricia look. Let her see the difference. "This is private property," Patricia said, lowering her voice. "You should leave." "Actually," Richard replied, "this property is under review." Patricia laughed lightly. "You can't just say things and make them true." Richard stepped forward. "You can't just steal money and make it charity." The room went quiet. Patricia set her glass down slowly. "You're embarrassing yourself." Richard's voice dropped. "You embarrassed yourself the moment you filed false statements." Patricia's eyes flashed. "You abandoned her." Emily spoke then. "You imprisoned me." Patricia turned sharply. "I gave you a home. You gave me rules," Emily said, "and fear." A man near the sofa shifted uncomfortably. "Patricia, what is this?" Patricia smiled too fast. "Family disagreement." Richard reached into his coat and removed a folder. He placed it on the table beside the wine. "Those cars," he said, "are registered under shell entities linked to your personal account. The funds trace back to Emily's custodial account. The sale you authorized this afternoon was flagged." Patricia's smile wavered. "You're bluffing," she said. The front door opened behind them. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, calm and purposeful. A woman in a dark blazer followed, badge visible. "Patricia Coleman," the woman said. "We have a warrant." The room erupted in whispers. Patricia's face drained of color. "This is outrageous." The officer stepped forward. "Please put the glass down." Patricia did. Her hand shook. "You're making a mistake," she said, voice cracking. "I did what I had to do." The woman in the blazer looked at Emily. "Ms. Whitmore, would you like to step outside?" Emily nodded. She walked past Patricia without looking at her. Outside, the night air felt sharp and clean. Emily wrapped her arms around herself as the sounds of the house shifted behind her. Papers rustling, drawers opening, the low murmur of official voices. Richard joined her a moment later. "It's happening," Emily said. "Yes," Richard replied. She waited for the relief. It didn't come. Instead, there was a hollow ache. "I thought I'd feel different," she admitted. Richard nodded. "Justice rarely feels like triumph." They stood in silence as the officers led Patricia out. She didn't look at Emily. She didn't look at Richard. She stared straight ahead, chin lifted, dignity clutched tightly as it slipped away. As the car pulled off, Emily exhaled. Now what, she asked. Now Richard said, "We don't rush." She looked at him. "You're not trying to fix this overnight?" "No," he said. "I already tried that." Emily considered him. "You're not asking me to forgive you." "No." "Good," she said. "Because I'm not ready." Richard nodded. "Neither am I." They drove away from the house, the columns fading in the rear-view mirror. The city opened up ahead, lights stretching into distance. Emily leaned back against the seat, exhausted and alert all at once. For the first time, the future did not feel like a trap. It felt like terrain, uneven, uncertain, but finally visible. And somewhere behind them, a door closed on a life built on stolen certainty, while ahead the road remained unwritten, demanding something harder than gratitude. Choice. The news broke before morning. Emily woke to the sound of voices drifting from the other room, low and urgent, the cadence unmistakable even before words became clear. Televisions always spoke the same language when something serious happened. Controlled excitement. Moral certainty delivered with polished concern. Sources confirm an investigation into alleged misuse of custodial funds. Emily sat up, heart pounding. For a brief, disorienting second, she expected to see the shelter ceiling above her. Instead, there was a clean white wall, a narrow window, curtains pulled back just enough to let early light spill across the floor. Transitional housing. Temporary. Safe. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood. Her body still expected resistance, still expected permission. In the living area, Richard stood with his back to her jacket, already on phone pressed to his ear. The television showed a familiar house, white columns framed by yellow tape. Her former house. The word former landed with a weight she hadn't anticipated. "Yes," Richard said quietly. "No comment at this time." He ended the call and turned. "You should eat," he said. "There's coffee, too. Not great coffee, but it exists." Emily nodded. She poured herself a mug and wrapped her hands around it. The warmth steadied her. They found everything she said. They found enough. Richard replied, "The rest will come." Emily watched his face. There were shadows under his eyes. He hadn't slept. "They're going to ask about you," she said. "They already have," Richard said. "I declined. That won't stop them." "No," he agreed. "But it slows them." Emily exhaled. "I don't want to be a headline." Richard met her gaze. "You won't be. Not unless you choose to be." That mattered. The choice. By noon, the district attorney's office had frozen assets. By afternoon, an emergency conservatorship had been denied outright. Patricia's attorney released a statement full of words like misunderstanding and family complexity. Emily read it once, then closed the tab. "That's not an apology," she said. "No," Richard replied. "It's a delay." They sat across from each other at the small table, legal documents spread between them. New words, new structures. Independent trustee. Dual oversight. Mandatory reporting. It was language meant to protect people from exactly what had happened to her. "You don't have to do this now," Richard said. "We can wait." Emily shook her head. "No. I need to understand it while I still remember what not understanding cost me." He nodded. They worked through it slowly. Emily asked questions, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times. She took notes. She circled things. She crossed others out. At one point she stopped and looked up. "Why didn't anyone ever explain this to me?" Richard didn't pretend confusion. "Because explanation gives people leverage. Emily absorbed that. "I want leverage. You'll have it," he said. "But it won't make you safe by itself." She smiled faintly. Neither did silence. The days that followed blurred together. Meetings, statements, background checks. A social worker assigned not because Emily needed supervision, but because the system insisted on witnesses when it failed publicly. Emily tolerated it, answered questions, corrected assumptions. "You're very composed," one woman said. "I had practice," Emily replied. At night, she lay awake listening to unfamiliar quiet. No footsteps outside her door. No rules posted on walls. The absence of control felt like standing on a cliff edge. Freedom she was learning had vertigo. Richard checked in daily. Not hovering. Present. "You don't owe me updates," he said once. "I know," Emily replied. "I want them. That mattered too." The prosecutor called on the 5th day. "They're offering a plea," she said. "Full restitution, admission of guilt, reduced sentence." Emily closed her eyes. Patricia's voice echoed in her memory. Calm, certain, final. "What happens if she takes it?" Emily asked. "She avoids trial," the prosecutor said. "You avoid testifying." Emily opened her eyes and looked at Richard. He waited. He always did now. "I'll testify," Emily said. The silence on the line stretched. "Ms. Whitmore," the prosecutor said carefully, "this will be public. Painful." "I know," Emily said. "That's why I want to." After the call, Richard spoke first. "You don't have to prove anything." "I'm not," Emily said. "I'm naming it." The courtroom was fuller than before. Cameras outside, reporters murmuring. Emily sat at the table and felt the old instinct rise. Stay small, stay agreeable. Don't make it worse. Then she remembered the envelope. The rules. The line written in tight, controlled ink. Gratitude is not optional. She took the oath. She spoke clearly. About the locks, the rules, the isolation disguised as protection. She did not cry. She did not dramatize. She described. Patricia watched without expression. When Emily finished, the room felt altered. Not shocked. Adjusted. The judge sentenced Patricia to prison time and ordered restitution. It was measured. Procedural. Not cinematic. Emily felt no surge of victory. Just a quiet closing. Outside, the press surged forward, microphones extended, questions overlapped. Emily raised a hand. "I'm not here to perform resilience," she said. "I'm here to reclaim what was taken." The cameras stilled. She stepped back. Later in the car, Richard spoke. "You didn't look at her." "I didn't need to," Emily said. The trust fund was restructured within the month. Not just restored, fortified. Emily signed papers that gave her control and accountability in equal measure. She moved into a small apartment of her own. Secondhand furniture, blank walls, possibility everywhere. Richard visited once, then waited to be invited again. "Dinner," Emily said over the phone. "My place. No explanations." He brought bread. She burned the pasta slightly. They ate anyway. "You're not staying," she said. "No," Richard replied. "I'll go when you're done pretending you don't know that." She smiled. As he stood to leave, Emily spoke. "You're not forgiven." Richard nodded. "I know." But she added, "You're here." He paused. "Yes." That night, Emily sat at her desk and opened a new document. Not a statement, not testimony, something else. She titled it with a question she had lived inside for 18 years. Where did it go? Then she wrote a second line. And who benefits when no one asks? Outside, the city moved on. Inside, a young woman who had been told to accept scraps wrote her way forward, not toward gratitude, but toward authorship. And somewhere deep in the structures meant to protect something had been forced into the light not by wealth alone, but by refusal. Refusal to stay quiet, refusal to be managed, refusal to disappear. The first check arrived without ceremony. Emily found it folded inside a plain envelope slid under her apartment door. No logo, no flourish. She stared at it for a long time before picking it up as if the paper itself might accuse her of wanting too much. When she finally opened it, the number stared back in careful type, modest, by any wealthy standard enormous by hers. She felt a rush of heat, then a hollowing calm. Money, she was learning, did not announce itself with certainty. It waited for your reaction. She didn't cash it that day. Instead, she walked. Past the corner store where the clerk nodded now that he recognized her. Past the bus stop where she used to count coins in her pocket without checking the schedule. Past the library steps where she had slept once, jacket folded into a pillow, eyes open to the sound of security shoes. The city had not changed. She had. At a small cafe near the river, she ordered coffee and sat by the window. The barista asked her name and wrote it on the cup, spelling it wrong. Emily didn't correct him. She watched the river instead, the way the water moved forward without asking permission, carrying whatever it was given. Her phone buzzed. Richard. "You don't have to respond," he'd said once, but he always answered when she did. "I didn't cash it," she texted. A pause. Then, "You don't have to explain." She looked at the check again, folded it, and slid it back into the envelope. Not yet. The foundation meeting was scheduled for later that week. Not a press event. Not a gala. A room with a table and a stack of folders and people who had learned to sit quietly while other people spoke over them. Emily had asked for that. She wanted the room to feel like work, not performance. Richard arrived early, as he always did. He chose a seat against the wall, not at the head of the table. He brought nothing but a pen. "You don't need me here," he said when she walked in. "I know," Emily replied. "I want you here." That was the difference. Want, not need. The others filtered in. A housing advocate with tired eyes, a financial counselor who spoke plainly, a former caseworker who had learned to mistrust enthusiasm. They shook Emily's hand without reverence. That mattered too. Emily opened the meeting herself. "This isn't a rescue," she said. "It's a repair." A few heads lifted. "We're not here to congratulate ourselves," she continued. "We're here because systems fail quietly, and when they fail quietly, people disappear." She didn't mention her aunt. She didn't mention the trial. She talked about transitions, about what happened when oversight ended and assumptions took over, about how money without witnesses became a weapon. The advocate nodded. The counselor scribbled notes. Richard watched her with an expression that surprised him. Not pride, recognition. When the meeting ended, the counselor lingered. "You're good at this," she said. Emily shrugged. "I've been on the other side." "That's usually what makes people effective," the woman replied. "And dangerous." Emily smiled faintly. "I'm fine with that." The article came out the next morning. Not the kind Emily feared, not a spectacle. A long piece measured investigative. It named the loopholes. It quoted the statutes. It described Emily without pity. It mentioned Richard without absolution. He read it twice. When Emily called, he answered on the first ring. "They didn't let you off the hook," she said. "No," he replied. "They shouldn't." A pause. "Are you okay with that?" "I am," he said. "It's accurate." Silence stretched comfortable now. "There's something else," Emily said. "Tell me." She hesitated. Someone reached out. "From my aunt's church. She said Patricia helped a lot of people, that I should consider forgiveness." Richard closed his eyes. "And?" "I told her forgiveness isn't a debt," Emily said. "It's a choice, and I'm not paying it to strangers." "Well said," Richard replied. That afternoon, Emily cashed the check. Not at a bank downtown with marble floors and hushed voices. At a branch near her apartment where the teller smiled and asked if she needed anything else. Emily said no. She stepped outside and felt nothing explode. No confetti, no chorus, just the steady weight of a choice made. She opened a new account the next day. She sat with the advisor and asked questions until the man stopped assuming and started explaining. She requested monthly statements and independent review. She wrote down passwords in 2 places and memorized them anyway. Control, she learned, was a practice. That night, she cooked again. Pasta better this time. She invited no one. Ate slowly. Cleaned up. Left the dishes to dry in the rack instead of putting them away. Proof she could decide when things were finished. Richard called later. "I'm flying out for a week," he said. "I won't check in." "Okay," Emily replied. "If you need anything, I know," she said. "I won't." He paused. "That's good." When he returned, he didn't bring gifts. He brought a question. "What would you do if this never happened?" he asked as they walked along the river again. Emily considered it. "I don't know. Probably smaller things. Safer ones. And now?" "Now I want to be inconvenient," she said. "To the right people." He nodded. "That tracks." The letter arrived at the end of the month, handwritten, careful, from Patricia. Emily didn't open it at first. She left it on the counter and went to bed. She dreamed of locked doors and open water. In the morning, she made coffee and tore the envelope open. It was an apology. Sort of. Words arranged to sound like responsibility without actually touching it. References to love, to sacrifice, to misunderstanding. Emily read it once, then folded it and placed it in a drawer. Not as evidence, as context. She didn't respond. Later that week, she stood in front of a small group at the shelter where she had first slept. No cameras, just chairs and faces, and the low hum of a building that never rested. "I won't tell you it gets easy," she said. "It gets clearer. And clarity is enough to start." Afterward, a young woman approached her. "How did you know you deserved more?" Emily answered without thinking. "I didn't. I decided." On her way home, the city lights reflected off the windows like a second skyline, softer, less certain. Emily walked up the stairs to her apartment and unlocked the door. Inside, the quiet waited. Not empty. Available. She sat at her desk and opened her document again. Where did it go? And who benefits when no one asks? She added a third line. What changes when someone finally does? Outside traffic moved. Somewhere else meetings continued, statutes remained, money flowed as it always had. But in this small apartment, a young woman who had been managed for most of her life wrote herself into the system that had failed her, not as a victim, not as a symbol, but as an interruption. And interruptions, she was learning, were where change began. The hearing room at the state capitol was smaller than Emily expected, narrower wood, paneled, the kind of place where decisions were made quietly and then explained loudly later. She sat at the long table with a name card in front of her hands, flat, breathing slow. Across from her lawmakers, shuffled papers and adjusted microphones. None of them looked like villains. That unsettled her more than hostility ever could. "Ms. Whitmore," the chair said, voice measured, practiced. "Thank you for appearing voluntarily." Emily nodded. "Thank you for asking." Richard sat behind her in the public seating, not beside her, not looming. "Present. Witnessing." The chair continued. "We're reviewing proposed amendments to custodial oversight. Your experience has been cited in several briefs." Emily felt the weight of that word. Experience. Not trauma, not scandal. Experience. She leaned toward the microphone. "I didn't plan to be here," she said. "I planned to be invisible." The system did the rest. A murmur moved through the room. She spoke without notes. About how guardianship blurred into ownership. About how reports could be filed without ever being read by the person they described. About how silence was rewarded with efficiency. She described the moment she aged out and how everything that had been framed as care collapsed into absence. When people talk about bad actors, she said they miss the more common problem. Bad structures. Structures that don't ask follow-up questions because asking would slow things down. A man on the panel frowned. "Are you suggesting intent is irrelevant?" "No," Emily replied. "I'm saying impact doesn't wait for intent to be proven." The chair nodded slowly. "And what would you change?" Emily didn't rush. Mandatory independent review before age transition. Direct communication with beneficiaries. Plain language explanations. And consequences for silence. A pause. Pens moved. Afterward, in the hallway, a woman approached her. Early 60s. Silver hair. Sharp eyes softened by recognition. "I chaired the committee when the current statute passed," she said. "We thought we were protecting families." Emily met her gaze. "You protected paperwork." The woman flinched, then nodded. "We can do better." Outside, cameras waited. Emily stopped before they could surround her. "I won't answer questions today," she said. "I answered them in the room that mattered." She walked past them, pulse steady, the sound of her footsteps louder than the shouted names. That evening, Richard waited by the window of her apartment, hands clasped behind his back. "You were clear," he said. "I was angry," Emily replied. "Yes," he said, "and precise." They ordered takeout and ate on the floor, cartons, open knees touching. It felt temporary in the way beginnings often did. The next weeks brought invitations, panels, interviews, offers wrapped in urgency. Emily said no more often than yes. She learned the shape of her limits by touching them. One afternoon, she found Richard in her kitchen staring at a legal pad. "What's that?" she asked. "A resignation letter," he said. She frowned. "From what?" "From the board," he replied. "My name still opens doors. Sometimes it blocks them." Emily leaned against the counter. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said. "I want to." She watched him write. Not performative, deliberate. He signed, folded the page, and set it aside. "I spent years assuming distance was neutral," he said. "It isn't?" She nodded. "Neither is proximity." The trial's final phase arrived quietly. Sentencing adjustments. Asset disposition. Paperwork that closed doors without drama. Patricia did not look at Emily when the judge spoke. Emily did not look back. Afterward, in the hallway, a young reporter caught up. "Do you feel closure?" Emily considered it. "I feel continuity." The reporter blinked. "Could you explain?" "No," Emily said gently. "But you can write that I said it." That night she walked alone along the river. The city reflected itself in pieces fractured and beautiful. She thought about the shelter, about the women who had watched her leave with cautious hope, about how leaving was not an ending, but a redistribution of risk. Her phone buzzed. A text from the counselor. "We secured funding for the pilot program. 3 counties, starts next quarter." Emily smiled. She typed back, "I'll be there." When she returned home, there was a package waiting. Inside, a thin book. No title on the cover, just her name embossed small. She opened it. Inside were blank pages. Richard watched her from the doorway. "I thought you might want one place where no one interrupts." She ran her hand over the paper. "Thank you." Weeks passed. The pace changed. Slower, deeper. Emily began to teach a workshop at the shelter, not about money, but about questions. How to ask them. How to keep asking when answers came dressed as kindness. One evening after everyone left, a teenager lingered. "What if they don't like me when I ask?" she said. Emily stacked chairs. "They won't," she said. "That's how you know the question matters." At home, she opened the book and wrote. Not testimony, not policy. Memory braided with observation. She wrote about locked cabinets and unlocked futures, about how systems trained people to be grateful for what they were denied. Richard read none of it unless invited. One morning, he knocked. "I'm moving," he said. Emily blinked. "Where?" "Closer," he replied. "Not in." She smiled. "Good." They walked together to the market. He carried the bags. She chose the fruit. The ordinary felt earned. At the register, the cashier glanced at Emily. "You're the one from the hearing." Emily nodded. "Thank you," the woman said quietly. "My sister went through something like that." Emily felt the familiar weight rise. She met it and let it pass. "I'm glad she's not alone." Outside, the sky threatened rain. Richard held the door. Emily stepped through. Later, as the first drops fell, she sat by the window with her notebook. She wrote another line beneath the others. What changes when someone finally does? Then, she added one more. Who is responsible for what happens next? The rain thickened, tapping insistently, the city answering with its own rhythms. Emily closed the book and rested her forehead against the glass. She felt tired. Not drained. Purpose tired. The kind that came from standing upright for longer than you thought you could. Behind her, the kettle clicked off. She turned, poured tea, and sat back down. The work was not finished. It would never be finished. But it was hers now. The letter arrived on a Tuesday that felt deliberately ordinary. Emily found it wedged between grocery flyers and a community newsletter. The envelope heavier than it needed to be, the return address typed with a restraint that suggested lawyers and long conversations. She didn't open it right away. She set it on the counter, washed her hands, dried them slowly, as if the sequence itself could prepare her. When she finally tore it open, the paper inside was thick official, the kind meant to last. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a plea. It was a notification. The state had adopted the pilot provisions: independent review before age transition, direct beneficiary communication, plain language disclosures, mandatory reporting triggers tied to silence, not just misconduct. Emily read the list twice, then a third time. She sat down at the table and closed her eyes. The feeling that came was not relief. It was gravity. The quiet recognition that something had shifted beyond her, that a lever she had pulled would continue moving even after she stepped back. Her phone buzzed. "Richard, you should check your mail." She smiled despite herself and typed back, "I did." A pause. Then, proud isn't the word. It's heavier than that. She left the letter on the table and went for a walk. The city was in one of its in-between moods, clouds highlight undecided. She passed the park where she and Richard had first talked without witnesses. A bench had been repainted since then. New color, same view. At the river, she leaned on the railing and watched the water carry leaves wrappers, the occasional stubborn branch that refused to sink. She thought about movement, about how systems changed, not by erasure, but by friction. That afternoon, the shelter called. A young woman had been asking for her, not a crisis, a question. Emily went. The building smelled the same, cleaner than memory suggested, but still worn. She recognized the volunteer at the desk. The woman smiled real this time. "She's in the back," she said. "Says she doesn't want to be rescued." Emily nodded. "Good." The girl sat with her hands folded, posture careful, eyes measuring. She reminded Emily of herself at the beginning. Not hopeful, not hopeless, alert. "I heard you ask good questions," the girl said. Emily sat across from her. "I ask stubborn ones." The girl smiled faintly. "I don't know what I'm entitled to." Emily didn't answer immediately. She leaned forward, elbows on knees. Entitlement is a legal term, she said. Worth isn't. The girl swallowed. So what do I do? You ask for things in writing, Emily said. You keep copies. You don't let anyone tell you confusion is gratitude. They talked until the room filled with evening. When Emily left, she felt the familiar ache behind her eyes. Not sorrow, responsibility. At home, Richard waited with dinner already cooling. He stood when she entered, then stopped himself half laughing. I keep forgetting you don't need that, he said. She set her bag down. You can stand if you want. They ate quietly at first. Then he spoke. I received a call, Richard said, from a former board member. He asked if I thought the reforms went too far. Emily looked up. What did you say? That they didn't go far enough, Richard replied. And that distance isn't neutrality. It's a choice. She nodded. You're getting good at that. He smiled. Practice. After dinner, Emily opened her notebook, the one with the blank cover. She reread the lines she'd written months ago, the questions that had carried her through uncertainty. Where did it go? And who benefits when no one asks? What changes when someone finally does? Who is responsible for what happens next? She added another line. Who do we protect when protection feels inconvenient? The next morning, she received an email from the counselor. The pilot program had funding. The first cohort would begin in the fall. Emily was invited to design the orientation. She didn't hesitate. She said yes. The interview request came later that week. National outlet, thoughtful reporter, long format. Emily agreed on one condition. No photos. They met in a quiet office with windows that looked out on nothing in particular. The reporter asked about money. Emily redirected to process. The reporter asked about forgiveness. Emily redirected to accountability. Do you see yourself as a symbol? The reporter asked. Emily shook her head. Symbols don't get tired. The article ran with restraint. It quoted her accurately. It did not turn her into a lesson. It left space. People wrote. Some thanked her. Some argued. Some tried to pull her into their own stories. She read selectively. She replied rarely. One evening, Richard knocked with a small box. He set it on the table and didn't open it. I found these, he said. In storage. Inside were letters. Not to Emily, to Laura. Written over years. Never sent. Apologies that had waited too long. Questions that had gone unanswered. I didn't know what to do with them, Richard said. Emily lifted one carefully. You don't have to do anything. He nodded. I thought you should choose. She placed the letters back in the box. Closed the lid. We'll decide later. That night she dreamed of doors. Some locked, some open, some leading nowhere at all. When she woke, the light was soft and forgiving. The sentencing adjustment was finalized the following week. Patricia's term extended slightly due to additional findings. Emily read the notice once. She did not feel vindicated. She felt done. At the market, the cashier asked if she was the woman from the hearing. Emily said yes. The cashier nodded. My mom was a guardian. She did her best. Emily smiled. Best should be supported. On the walk home, rain began without warning. Emily didn't run. She let it soak her hair, her jacket the street darkening beneath her feet. The city smelled alive. When she reached her building, she paused under the awning and looked back. She thought of the girl at the shelter, of the woman at the desk, of the legislator who had admitted protection had stopped at paper. She thought of Richard, who had learned that repair required presence, not performance. Upstairs, she hung her coat and opened the window. Rain tapped insistently. She sat at her desk and wrote again, not policy, not memory, but something like a map. It wasn't complete. It didn't need to be. Later, her phone buzzed. A text from Richard. "I'll be late tomorrow. Don't wait up." She typed back, "I won't. See you when I see you." She closed the notebook and leaned back in her chair. Outside, the rain slowed. The city resumed its usual negotiations. Emily felt the familiar tension of unfinished work settle in her shoulders. Not dread, purpose. The story had moved beyond her, now carried forward by hands she would never meet, questions she would never hear. That was how change worked when it lasted. It stopped needing a narrator. She turned off the light and stood by the window watching reflections ripple across wet pavement. Somewhere else, another envelope would arrive. Another person would decide whether to open it. Emily breathed out steady. The work continued. The morning Emily moved the notebook from her desk to the shelf, it felt less like an ending than a recalibration. The apartment was quiet, in the way spaces become once they stop waiting for something to happen. Light came in through the window, soft and undecided. Emily stood barefoot on the floor, coffee cooling in her hand, looking at the stack of papers she no longer needed to read every day. Letters, drafts, copies, proof. They had done their job. They no longer needed to sit within arm's reach. She slid the notebook into place between two plain books and stepped back. Across the room, Richard watched without speaking. He had learned when silence was presence and when it was avoidance. This was the first kind. "You don't have to keep it visible," he said gently. "I know," Emily replied. "That's why I moved it." They left the apartment together and walked toward the river, the air carrying the early hints of fall. Leaves shifted underfoot. The city moved around them familiar now, in a way that didn't demand vigilance. Richard spoke after a while. "I received confirmation this morning. The pilot is being expanded statewide." Emily nodded. "Good. And the federal committee wants to review it next year." She stopped walking. "That's bigger." "Yes," he said. "It is." She took a breath. "I won't be the face of it." "I know," Richard said. "You never wanted to be." They stood at the railing and watched the water. Boats moved slowly, deliberately. Nothing rushed here. That felt earned. Later that day, Emily returned to the shelter, not as a speaker, not as a symbol, but as someone who knew where the coffee filters were kept. She helped set up chairs. She listened more than she spoke. When a young woman asked her how long it took to feel normal, Emily didn't answer with reassurance. She answered with honesty. "It takes as long as it takes," she said, "and sometimes normal isn't the goal." That night, Emily cooked again. She was getting better at it, less tentative. She burned nothing. Richard ate with appreciation that had nothing to do with hunger. "I'm moving again," he said casually. Emily glanced up. "Where this time?" "Down the street," he replied. "Smaller place. Fewer rooms to hide in." She smiled. "That sounds intentional." "It is." After dinner, Richard stood by the door. "I won't come by tomorrow. I know," Emily said. "But I'll call." "I know." He paused. "You don't owe me consistency." "I know," she said again. Then added, "But I like it." He nodded once and left. Emily cleaned up slowly, then sat at her desk. She opened the notebook one last time, not to add a question, but to read the first lines she had ever written. Where did it go? She closed the book and turned off the lamp. Weeks passed. The pace held. Emily worked. She taught. She reviewed materials with people who would never know her story beyond its utility. That was exactly how she wanted it. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the state office. A formal thank you. Emily read it once and recycled it. Gratitude, she had learned, mattered most when it was practiced, not documented. She walked to the market that evening and chose apples, carefully weighing each one in her hand. At the register, the cashier nodded at her. "You're the one who helped change things," the woman said quietly. Emily shook her head. "I asked questions." The cashier smiled. "That's how things change." At home, Emily sliced the apples and arranged them neatly. She ate one standing at the counter, juice on her fingers, unconcerned. The ordinary felt like the most radical outcome of all. Later, she stood by the window and watched the city lights come on one by one, not dramatic, not coordinated, just persistent. Somewhere systems were adjusting. Somewhere else they were resisting. Both were expected. Her phone buzzed. A message from the counselor. "First orientation is full. Wait list forming." Emily typed back, "Good. Keep it manageable." She set the phone down and leaned her forehead against the glass. She thought about the girl at the shelter, about the woman at the desk, about the judge who had listened, about the legislator who had admitted protection had stopped at paper, about Richard who had learned that money could open doors, but presence kept them open. She thought about the life she might have lived if no one had asked where the money went. Smaller, quieter, managed. Instead, she had chosen interruption. Emily turned away from the window and moved through her apartment, turning off lights, locking doors, the simple rituals of ownership. When she reached the bedroom, she paused, then went back to the shelf and touched the spine of the notebook once, not in reverence, in acknowledgement. She lay down and closed her eyes. The city hummed. The future waited, not politely but patiently. This was not a story about money. It never had been. It was about what happened when silence was mistaken for safety and what became possible when someone refused that mistake. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think about who is being protected and who is being ignored, take a moment to like, subscribe, and comment. 3 words: